And we have Miss Mock. Hi, Janet.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
We've assembled a team of our members from coast to coast to talk with you. I'm going to read them, guys, starting from how I see them on the screen. So it may not necessarily be in order. We have Katia in Philadelphia. We have Thomasina also in Philadelphia. We have Sharonda Williams, our young one, in Atlanta.
Hi.
We have Patrick Reilly in New York.
Hello.
We have Al McGee in Florida and Miami, the Miami, South Florida area.
Hello, everyone.
We have
Hello,
the fabulous one, the Curvy Critic in Los Angeles. We have Rhonda Rasha Penrice in Atlanta. And we have the amazing Ray Cornelius also in Atlanta.
Ooh.
So without further ado, we're going to jump into this. I mean, Janet Mock needs no introduction, cultural icon, creative, transformative on so many levels, has moved into the area of writing, producing, directing, continues to expand, continues to grow. Again, we thank you, Ms. Mock, for joining us. And members, I'm going to let you do what you do so well. Let's do this.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Mock. My name's Thomasina. In addition to executive producing Hollywood, you also wrote and directed a few episodes. Can you talk to us about what most attracted you to the project and what you most want to resonate with audiences once they see it?
Well, first off, I want to thank you all for taking the time in this insane chaos of unknowing that we're all sharing and living in. It is such a joy to be able to share this project with you and share this space with you, number one. And I'm glad you all look well, but I'm sure we're all affected in our many different ways, with family members, with just Black people in general not getting what they deserve and need during this time. And so I want to thank you for pausing with me and talking about the art that we create. So what really first drew me to Hollywood was the idea, to be honest, was the sex workers piece of it, because in Ryan's original pitch to me, it really was about this kind of outlawed sexuality that was going on in the 1940s, which we know kind of hit its crescendo in 1969 with the Stonewall riots, with outlawed LGBTQ people fighting back for their rights to just simply love, to simply have sex, to simply live free. And so I was interested in engaging in that complicatedness of sex work and the ways in which, you know, folk of color, the ways in which sex workers, the ways in which queer people were policed at that time. Then he told me the next pitch he kind of had. First he soft pitched me and I was like, okay, I'll stick to finishing up season 2 of Pose, because I was directing the finale at that time. And he then had another pitch and he said, well, we're now thinking about more of a revisionist history. And I said, so what's gonna happen to the Black girl? And so that's how I got involved. And that was, that was kind of my big in to say that, okay, I'll give my all to this. And I'm really grateful that I jumped headfirst into the project. I joined after they had written and broken, him and Ian, his co-creator, Ryan's co-creator, when they had written and broken the first 3 episodes, which were kind of like their pilot almost. And so I read them over and I was just trying to locate our people. And I think that that was largely, you know, beyond the whole larger ensemble, but that was really where I felt the most useful, to say, how are we going to really critique Hollywood as an industry, as a town, and how do those critiques from back then still live in the ways in which Black people are seen on screen, in the ways in which Black people, even if they're not on screen when they're behind the camera, how they're surveillanced and policed and told that, oh, this won't sell, or no one will come and see a picture with, you know, Black folk in the center. And so it was kind of like those conversations, which were tough to have in the room, that really led, I think, to the push for the show to kind of really rally behind Archie and Camille's stories.
Thank you.
Miss Janet, it's Carla Renata, the Curvy Critic. How you doing?
Good, so good to see you again.
Oh, it's good to see you as well. So listen, there's one moment that I really loved in watching Hollywood. It's the episode where Archie finds out that he's not going to be moving forward with the project. And you made a conscious decision to zoom in and do a close-up of his face in that moment so that we could see how that resonates in his core to being told that even though he had this fantabulous script, it's still not enough. Why did you make that decision to make that move at that point in time?
Oh my God, that's why I do the work that we do and why it's so important that we see this work. So thank you for seeing that. To me, when I read that scene, I didn't write it, and I thought it was purposeful that Ian wrote that scene, because I was like, white people white-splain all kinds of things to us every single day. And so for me, I knew that I would be able to take it as director, and I knew as soon as I read kind of Joe Mantello's kind of monologue as Dick about why he had to take his name off and how he believes that it's not fair, and you know, he too is in it with in the struggle. And I was like, it's not necessary for us to see Joe's face in all of that exposition. What's necessary is to see the ways in which Black folk continually have to grit and bear it when we work within a system. We tend to have to, some of us make the conscious choice to say, I'm going to take a breath, my eyes are going to well, but not a single tear will drop in this moment. And I think that that shows the deep resilience of our people, specifically Archie in that moment as an out gay man who's doing sex work in order to get along, to be able to make his dreams happen. And so I just wanted to be on Jeremy Pope's very beautiful face with those hazel eyes. And I wanted to see the turn in him when he respectfully pushes back. I think that you want to be with him. And so for me, just as a fan, as a living, breathing Black person, to me, it was like, no, we're gonna stay on his face, and all that Joe is saying is gonna be like, wah, 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 wah. But what we wanna see is we wanna see how he feels his way through that disappointment and injustice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Hello, Janet. This is Al McGee here with your entertainment ticket here in Florida. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, Al.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you and to talk to you. But let me ask you a question about episode 4, the episode that you directed about the screen test. Now, I was a little bit surprised how they made Rock Hudson do so many screen tests. Why was that written in the script about that particular character? But your directing for that scene was very emotional for me. In fact, the whole series, very emotional for me, because I said, wow, I wish that would have happened, but I know it could have happened, but they didn't let it happen. So, you know, episode 4 on the screen test, why did you all shoot it like that and wrote it like that?
There was a legend that Rock Hudson had, I think for one of his first screen tests with Henry Wilson, that Henry kind of spun for him in a similar way that he spun for him in our story for Meg, that he had a hard time mixing his I's and U's in the monologue that he kind of had to do. And so he kept on messing up. So there's a legend that in one of his very first screen tests, he did that. So we wanted to speak to that. And I think that that particular episode that me, Ian, and Ryan wrote was all about the high stakes of the single moment for an actor to step up, right? We have a moment where Camille has to step up and advocate and fight for her ability to even get a chance to screen test. We have Rock, who gets the screen test, but completely flubs and messes up his his moment where he could have played the romantic lead earlier on in his career. We have, you know, things tend to go very easy for David's character, our lead in it. So he came in and he killed his screen test, and fine, you know, Patti LuPone, who has history with him from the pilot episode, then shepherds him through. And then of course we have the struggle of someone who has to deal with nepotism, and how her nerves at the end of the day, despite her talent, didn't lead her to be able, gave her to throw in the towel. But she can throw in the towel because she will get 500 other chances as a really pretty white blonde to screen test again. But our girl Camille, as we have to do, she, you know, she composes herself and she gives us 3 singular focus, well-lit tears that enable her to be undeniable to the point at which it becomes a huge issue for the second half of our series, is the fact that the Black girl got a shot, she fought for her shot, she got in front of that camera, and when the dolly pushes in on her face, her tears hit at the exact right moment that Hollywood wants for an ingenue in a romantic lead drama. And so for us, that's kind of where all the different kind of ways in which we really centered the actor's journey in terms of their auditioning, and in terms of landing the role. Sometimes all it takes is that one take. And for Camille, she got her one take, and it sends all the white people going crazy to figure out, can we even cast the colored girl in the center of the picture? And so, but for Rock, we got that through one of our millions of little stories that we heard of the little legends of how he messed up on an early test.
A quick follow-up question. Now, as a director though, were you able to put your own input into the scenes that you directed, or you have to just follow the plan that the whole group put together?
Yeah, what's so great about, I think I've only had one experience where I directed an episode that I didn't write or wasn't in the writer's room for. And that was the second episode of television that I did, which was during the first season of The Politician. And that was, it was a great experience to be able to be just a guest director. But when you're not in the writer's room, you don't really have the agency in television to just make changes on the day. And so during that screen test sequence, working with Jake Pickling, who plays Rock Hudson, we improvised a lot, but he had his lines down for every single 55 takes that we kind of showed. And the poor guy had to do this for a 10-hour sequence. We shot the girls on their own day. So we had Samara and Laura shoot on a separate day because they also had a scene blanketing it. So they open up at the beauty area, kind of having their first camaraderie moment. But with the boys, we shot the boys on their own day, but we had Mira Sorvino, who actually didn't have any lines on camera. So the great genius of allowing your creatives to come in and bring their own thing. She ad-libbed so many lines. She's falling over on the thing, like doing this whole thing, because basically her character would be doing the most because she believes that she should be the romantic lead of this film. And so the comedy came out of that, and we had Jim Parsons playing off of her, and they had this whole feud that they brought together during rehearsal. And I was like, okay, we want all of this. We'll get this in everyone's coverage, but let's make sure that we give Jake what he needs when the camera's actually on him. And so in that way, we had a great sense of play. And for that whole sequence, I remember in the editing room, initially how it was scripted was that we were gonna see Camille's screen test as she's doing it. And so I shot everything, like the screen test within the TV show. And so you see the scrum and you see Raymond there as the director, you see all these things going on as she was doing her screen test. And then when I got to the edit, I said, actually, I don't wanna see Camille's screen test. I don't wanna see her do it. I wanna see her on that big screen for the first time, doing the scene, so that everyone, you kind of don't know, did she do well? Did she step up to her moment? Could she cry? Because earlier she had the argument with Ray about not being able to cry on camera, on cue in that way. And so when she actually does show up and everyone's watching her, you're like, she's undeniable. We have to give her the role. And so that's what creates the crazy moment for Patti. And so for us, we got to, the short answer to the question is, yes, I got to be able to do a lot of different stuff that I even changed lines on the day just because I could do that because I was credited on the scripts and was in the writer's room.
Well, thank you very much. And I love polls.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Janet. This is Ray Cornelius from Atlanta. I'm the host of Upfront Inside Atlanta's Entertainment Industry. Such a pleasure to talk with you. Totally loved Hollywood. I cried during a number of the episodes. My first time crying this year over a series. I want to go back to Jeremy Pope and just the decision to make him the character Archie. I've followed his career. I've loved him in Choir Boy, and saw that he was also on Broadway in, oh gosh, I Ain't Too Proud. But to see him now on the screen, on television, and taking his career to the next level, what was the deciding factor in casting him for this character? Because I thought it was perfect. We've not seen a character like this, LGBTQ Black male character from the 1940s in entertainment. So what was the deciding factor in bringing him on the show?
Well, we always knew on the page we wanted to get someone who was relatively unknown for that role, so that you would believe the entire journey that he was going on. And so I think Ryan, I remember it's so funny, I was having sushi with Ryan while I was taking a break during a turnaround on season 2 finale of Pose, where I was directing. And he was like, have you heard of Jeremy Pope? And I was like, yeah, I've seen Ain't Too Proud. I sadly didn't get to see Choir Boy, but I saw him in Ain't Too Proud, and I was like, okay, he's a star. I was like, anything that, I was like, you would be smart to get him now, because he hadn't had much in front of the camera experience yet. So no one, Broadway's so special because it kind of just disappears in a way. And if you want to see a show, you have to go to the archives in order to watch it one time that they allow you to see it for research purposes. And so I just said, he's a star. And Ryan knew that immediately. And so I think they had their own lunch or dinner, and he was like, we're casting Jeremy as Archie. And I was like, amazing. And so I was actually the reason why Jeremy got into season 3 of Pose, where he plays a big romantic lead. So he's been playing with us before we got shut down. He's a series regular this season, actually, on season 3 of Pose, playing a completely different kind of character. But everyone's gonna love him because he loves one of our main characters. Yeah, he's just great. He's so talented. We really got to work together very closely. I worked with all the actors closely, but I think there was a special affinity and obviously affection with, Jeremy and Laura, largely because we often were the only Black people on set, to be honest. And so I think that we were looking out for one another. We trusted one another. They would ask me questions as an executive producer about where their characters were going, because by the time we were shooting episode 4, I think they hadn't even gotten 5 through 7 yet. And so they had no idea about the fact that their characters were going to be victors in this entire process. But Jeremy's he's just a star. And so it was an easy in. And I think we had a lot of stage actors on, the series: Holland, Patti, Joe, and Jeremy. And so it just kind of made sense that we had these different generations of Broadway stars coming in front of the camera to show this, period piece.
Yeah. Well, I totally loved it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, Ray.
Hi, Janet. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Sharana from Pair Wait. It's interesting that you talked about, advocating for Jeremy. And in Hollywood, there's a lot of advocating for different communities in the show. And in this what if scenario of Hollywood, but I want to talk about your personal experience of how do you feel as, your position in Hollywood now, how has that changed the conversation?
Yeah, similar to Archie's arc as well as Camille's arc, a lot of the advocating, came from people with power and access, right? Specifically white folk with power and access. And so I think it's, for me, I'm deeply grateful to the fact that there was someone who was previously an outsider, Ryan, an out gay white man, who I think saw parts of himself and me in my journey, and who just kind of, I think at first, our story is very interesting because it's like he needed a Black trans woman's voice in the writer's room for Pose when they were crafting the series. It was created by 3 men who are not trans, who were writing the series that was centered around trans women. And so that's kind of how I came into the room. And I think that, having been such a presence in the trans community with my advocacy and you know, my memoirs and stuff, it was a great fit. And for me, I didn't really have any, you know, sights on working in Hollywood in that way. I thought maybe the one thing that I would do would be to adapt one of my books for the screen, you know. But I didn't really think that I'd be a writer, director, producer in that kind of way. And Pose just shifted and changed my life. And I think how well received the first season was and the groundbreaking nature of that particular cast and Billy Porter's stardom and NJ Rodriguez's ability to be the center of a show in this way really just blew things up for all of us. And so I think what was great was that, you know, Ryan knew immediately as my mentor, he was like, you need to work on something that's not trans. So he then put me on The Politician for an episode, and I got an experience to stand on my own on a show that I didn't write, on a show that's about these rich white kids, you know, and I got to do something outside of my outside of my sandbox, and I got to go back to Pose and like supervise production in season 2 and kind of be the showrunner on set and, you know, really take a big chunk in a swing with being trusted with the season finale, which was a big deal. And I think all those little decisions, and of course then my Netflix deal and stuff, I think the way that it hopefully reverberates through the industry is that we continue to empower people, non-traditional talent, to tell their own stories. I think there's greater conversations, not just about who's in front of the camera and on the billboards, but actually who's actually putting the words in those people's mouths, who can they trust after a take is done to say, do you think we got it, Janet? And yes, baby, we got it, you know, trust, you know, and there's just that innate sense of love and dedication and care that I think that I learned from my first season on Pose that has also graduated here. But I think that overall in the industry, we're having more conversations about, people care more about whose name is on the writing and directing list for an episode. Whereas I think before, many people probably didn't pay too much attention to who wrote the episode or who directed it. It was enough to see our people on screen. And I think now we have higher standards with that. And so it forces the gatekeepers, the Avis Ambergs of the world, the Ryan Murphys of the world, the studio heads, and development people to say, it's not enough to tell a story about a Black person. Who's the Black person writing it? Who's the Black person directing it? And I hope that we just keep on pushing for those standards to be met.
And just to follow up on that, you know, while watching this is really reminding me of Scotty Bowers and kind of the full service book that he wrote. And when we see the entrance of that gas station scene, you know, it immediately made me think of the documentary. And I wanted to know, did you talk to Scotty in regards to his book, his experiences, since it seems the show really relies a lot heavily on kind of that sex worker aspect of it?
We did it. We definitely took a lot of inspiration for Dylan McDermott's character, Ernie. When we knew we wanted to be in that same similar space, right? We knew the gas station, we got inspiration from that. But then we spread Scotty's character across 3 of our main characters, the first 3 men that you kind of see on screen, which is Archie, who's the hustler, the aspiring actor in David's character, Jack, and Ernie, played by Dylan McDermott. Scotty was such an interesting character that you wouldn't believe it in real life, that this person could be so advanced in his thinking, so centered as a hustler, and like that's part of his identity, that he's always hustled people, even when he was a kid who had to go through abuse. Like, it's so fascinating to have all that stuff. And then you have the tell-all nature of all the different kinds of stars who frequented the space. And so we didn't, because we weren't really telling Scotty's story. We always knew that it would just be a jumping off point, but we wanted to pay homage to all of those service people who were never given medals for doing the work that they do, which is life-saving work of providing a service for people who are forced to be underground in order to find love, affection, and touch, right? And so, and sadly, Scotty had already passed by the time we thought of this idea for this series, before Ryan and Ian, you know, created it. But we definitely pay homage to him, and we always say that he was one of the many muses for this show, in the similar way that Anna Mae Wong and Hattie McDaniel and Dorothy Dandridge and Rock Hudson are muses for us.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Ms. Mock. I wanted to ask you about what was was it purposeful, Archie's character because our community, and how do you hope his character finally propels us to have an honest conversation about our homophobia? Was it purposeful to have him be comfortable and proud of who he is? Because the one thing I did like, even though it was in that time frame, he was very adamant and he was very sure about who he was and his sexuality, and he had no qualms about it. Like, he wasn't living his life with shame, even though society looked upon him with shame.
Yeah, you know, what Archie, I think next to Ernie, is probably our most sexually free person on the series. One of the great injustices of writing for television on shows, specifically Ryan shows where scripts are a little long, is that you have to cut scenes, and sometimes you don't get the backstory scenes that we sometimes put in. And so I remember I wrote this monologue for Archie when all the boys go to the gas station to make money to actually be able to make the picture, where he talks about, you know, his sexuality and growing up, you know, in the South, going to Pentecostal church, of seeing, you know, gay people around, but gay people not being able to be out that they're gay. It was kind of like, you know, he knew the choir director and he knew, you know, all these people within church, these figures that were kind of role models for him, but he was always taught to be silent. And so one of the reasons why he flees to Hollywood is because of the power of his voice to be heard. The fact that his pen can allow him to tell stories about other outsiders who are silenced, other outsiders who are told to be ashamed of their ambition and their dreams. And so he comes to us fully kind of realized, because I think at that time period, to do what he was doing, you know, the first time we see Archie, it's so controversial. It's one of those scenes where I'm just like, oh my God. Because he's basically sex trafficked by Jack's character, but no one talks about it. It's like, it's like such a strange, it's such a very Ryan thing to do. But then when you see him for the first time, he's not shrinking and scared, and he's authoritative. He sits down in that theater, he's watching and he's looking for his next client, and he goes and like pounces over and then just does the deed without any kind of, should I be ashamed of this? It's like,
no shame.
Yeah, no shame. And so I think that when you see him for the first time, if character is what you do, if character is action, you get that this young man is going to do what needs to be done to get the dream fulfilled. And so for us, Archie was so singularly focused in that. And I think that he's also kind of the one that cuts through a lot of the BS at times. He doesn't like people talking around issues. He doesn't like being coddled in any kind of way. But he still has a lot of sincerity and heart. And if anything, the reason why he wouldn't initially be in a relationship with Rock is because Rock was so simple and naive in a way that he felt that that wasn't a practical relationship for him to actually engage in, until he realizes that he needs this relationship and he needs that simple kind of dream with this other person.
And to follow up, I'm sorry not to cut you up, to follow up, how do you hope seeing a character like that, because like I said, it's our community is so deeply rooted in homophobia. We will come up with all types of excuses to avoid really talking about the elephant in the room, which is that we will not, when we say Black people, we don't always mean members of the LGBTQ community. Like I'm always like, either we're for all of us or we're not. And how do you hope that seeing him standing firmly in who he is, and like you said, is he doesn't suffer fools easily. He knows where he's going. He knows who he is. Will help us have an intelligent conversation, not one for clickbait, so to say. And thank you.
Yeah, I'm always one that's always very careful. I don't think Black folk are more homophobic than anyone else. I just think that we speak on things and express our homophobia or transphobia differently. And so sometimes it's easy to target us, Black church-going folks, sometimes as more homophobic than everyone else, because white people are, but they are a lot more polite sometimes in their homophobia. And so they're probably doing it in a more systemic way versus a human contact kind of way at times. But I will say that for us, it's just by showing him as he is. It really is just saying Archie is a fully realized, talented, complicated figure and person with a voice who is deserving of being here, of being heard, of being seen, of creating the works that he wants to create. And so in that way, I hate to use the phrase, but you normalize it. Because he is the only Black man in a show, in this series, you follow this Black man and you just accept him and you're on his journey with him. Like you want the Black man to win, you want the Black girl to win. And so just one of those characters happened to be queer, right? Happened to be same gender loving. I think that what I hope that it does, I think that Jeremy Pope, which is reason why casting is so important, why it is oftentimes 90% of the work, is that you find someone that is so lovable and undeniable that you can't help but to love him, that hopefully he will get the NAACP nomination for lead actor, that he will be given in the same way that Billy is undeniable out in the world, that he's seen as a leading man, that a queer Black man can be the center of an ensemble, who can do the work, who can be on par with any other of these white boys who are out there or straight Black men who are out there. And so I think it's just in normalizing it and showing it and in not having any apologies. And I hope that what it does is that we embrace Jeremy and Archie just in the same way that we've embraced Billy and Pray Tell, is that they just become these beloved characters that you can't help but to root for them in life on screen, so that you then are able to check your own ignorances, your own biases, and that the next time you see a young Black LGBT person in your church, in your community, in your home, that you're able to love up on them in the same way that you were able to love up on Archie for those 7 episodes.
Hey, it's Rhonda here. Can you speak to like the parallel in your life to Hollywood to finding empowerment in your identity and being, I know you kind of talked about it throughout, but can you speak to it directly?
Yeah, you know, for me, I think working in this current phase of my career, specifically as a writer-director, it's just kind of been a continuation and an evolution of me stepping more fully into my power, just on a bigger platform. And so for me, you know, I started off my career working at People magazine. I was an editor there online when digital, you know, websites were seen as, you know, new media. And so being a bastard child that we kind of were, like people.com versus People, I was hustling in the same way that Archie had to hustle, in the sense of, you know, trying to figure out how can I fit in. And a part of my journey was deciding to not be open about being trans at that time period. And so as a young professional, as a 22-year-old, getting my first job for the first time, being the first person in my family to go to college, the first to then get a master's degree, the first to move to New York City and work in this industry that was kind of like the dream job that a million girls would kill for, I made compromises in order to navigate an unjust system. I was already having to navigate it as a Black person and as a woman, so throwing trans on top of that in my way of learning about myself and my identity in the world didn't seem like the greatest gift. Eventually, when I got bored and really was tired of writing headlines about Angelina Jolie and their kids, I realized that I needed to be more impactful with the stories that I was telling. And so that led me to write my books, which then led me to be able to have more voice and be more confident in my own journey as a Black trans woman, and to realize the importance of being present, of being visible, of speaking up. And that then brought, it kind of like segued me onto Pose. And so I just basically did that same work, not shrinking myself in a writer's room mostly full of men, in a writer's room where there was no one else who was trans until Our Lady J joined after finishing up on Transparent, but still only being the only Black trans woman with actual power to call the shots, literally and figuratively, on this, you know, Emmy, Peabody, Golden Globe, nominated show. And so I think that it was all like anyone's journey. It was a bunch of baby steps, but I think the work that I've been able to do as a writer and director, I think only further emboldened me to want to have my own slate of productions, to want to be able to tell stories about Black girls from all walks of life and Black folk from all walk of life, and not shrink us, but instead to say that we expand the space. We expand what it means to be Black. We expand what it means to be artful. We expand what it means to be impactful. Because I think always the burden for Black artists since the start of time has always been, we don't get to walk in alone. When we walk in, we have all the people who came before us on our shoulders, but then also knowing that the folk behind, where the door is currently closed, that hopefully, as Michelle Obama says, you push that door open and you pull people in with you. And so I'm always conscious of that as I do the work that I do. And so I think just with the immediacy and accessibility of television, because so many people watch it, that the characters that I create and the characters that I write and direct, hopefully they then, become greater representations of what we can and what we should be doing.
Patrick Reilly here, host of a gay talk show, the Happy Hour talk show here in New York City. I just love Hollywood. It really informs so much of what I do and cover here in New York on the theater scene. So to hear that Jeremy Pope has been such a joy to work with, and to know that Patti LuPone is in the mix is very exciting for me. But my question is, as a past chair of the NABJ Arts and Entertainment Task Force, the National Association of Black Journalists. When I first got involved in the organization, we got so excited. Well, actually, we were just surrounded with this polarizing story about Janet Cook.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that is a project that you're attached to. I just want to know, as you speak to these steps in your career, how have these steps informed this project that we wait with bated breath to see and experience?
Well, for me, it was one of my first pitches when I was when I was deciding where I was going to go in terms of my development deal in television. I have a first look deal with Netflix. And so one of the first things I wanted to do was tell the story of Janet. She was kind of this cautionary figure throughout, I studied journalism in undergrad and then got my master's at NYU in journalism. And so every space that I was in, there was always like one Black woman professor or one Black woman guide of sorts who was like, don't be like Janet Cook, and like, it just like, what, who's this Janet? And so she was almost like the boogeyman. And so in that sense, what was so interesting though, is that Janet's story hasn't really been told. Like, we don't have a comprehensive work on her, not from her. I'm surprised she never got a book deal to like tell her story. I'm sure there was a part of the community that wanted to just push her out and like just say, let's forget about this because she's not representative of all of us. And because she was the first, people say the first, but she was the first to get caught. I don't believe that there were not other people who fabricated sources, who made up quotes, who did all these things to get along, who like, fluffed up their essays or fluffed up their resumes in order to be seen and heard and be accepted into these spaces. But because she was the first to be caught, she was this great anti-hero in a way that I think, for me, the project has always been a take on, affirmative action and how white people see us and who they say is acceptable. There were many other, trailblazing figures at the Washington Post who didn't get as much acclaim. And so the film really is a two-hander between Janet and a Black female editor who brought in a lot of Black talent to the Washington Post, Vivian Brownlee. And so the story really is about these two women working within this system where they're kind of navigating this strange media landscape and workplace.
Well, we are so excited. Congratulations and continued success.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Ms. Mock, I want to thank you for this project. It was absolutely wonderful to view. but I want to ask if you can indulge us. You already gave us a nugget about Jeremy. What can we expect from the finals, this current season 3 of Pose? And will it have the time jump like the beginning of season 2? What can we expect?
Well, I was directing the premiere when we got shut down. I am proud to say that we were the last show to be shut down in all of Hollywood when we're shooting in New York, in the Bronx, where we shoot at. We are taking a little bit of a jump. We're in the mid-90s. Jeremy plays a young doctor. He works at the hospital with Judy. One of our main characters now works at the hospital. So the hospital is a big centerpiece, of course, this season, in the same way that, the ballroom and the House of Evangelista is a centerpiece. Our characters have different jobs. They have new careers, new loves. I won't say who Jeremy is with in the series. I think that we want to surprise and hold that for people, but we have to recalibrate the series now that we're in this new phase of not quite knowing what production is going to look like. Right. We have our show centers Black and brown LGBTQ people. And so for us, we have to, we want to protect our actors, we want to protect our crew. And so I think we are in a space, like a lot of productions, reevaluating, and we have to change our scripts. We have to change our season to be able to get not the green light, because we already have a green light, but to be able to safely return to work whenever we get to do that. And so I think as writers and producers on the show, we just have to rethink things. Like, we don't know what our ball scenes are going to look like now that we can't stuff 200 people in a set, that it's not safe, that we also have to be cognizant that because we're, using and we partner with LGBTQ actors and background actors, that, a lot of folk are immunocompromised, right? That, our people are overly represented in terms of HIV/AIDS. And so we have to be cautious about that. And so I think that right now, our scripts are going to change. We don't know what we're going to be able to shoot, what's going to be safe to shoot. And so just that practical nature of these new boundaries and standards and limitations for all productions. We're ready to get back to work. We miss doing what we do. The third season is going to have all the things that people love, the costumes, the music, the pop cultural references. We have some, OJ stuff. We have some, if we're talking about the mid-90s, you're talking about The Real World, Pedro, OJ, all these great, huge pop cultural moments that our characters will be engaging in, commentating on. We have some new characters like Jeremy's. That's really exciting. We're just excited to get back to work. The cast was ready. They had been away for a year. And so they're like, okay, we're doing it. And we had, I think, 8 days of shooting, and then we got shut down. And so now we're 6 weeks from that shutdown, and we're just kind of changing scripts basically through Zoom, just like this.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to see it, as I'm sure most people are. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Janet Al McGee again, here in Florida with your entertainment ticket. Now, you work for network television, but working for Netflix, which I feel is one of the greatest stations of all time, did you have more freedom working with Netflix compared to network television?
Yeah, Pose is with FX, and so we've always been very grateful to have a partner that really didn't police us in what we say is possible for the series. They really have given us so much freedom, and I think a lot of people go to FX because of that, developmental freedom. I think that one thing that you can do on Netflix that you kind of can't do on FX is the nudity. And so I think one of the things that in the earlier iterations of the scripts, there were so many more sex scenes and a lot more nudity. And I mean, like, in your face. When people have seen episode 3, but the first cut of episode 3 and how it was scripted was like, basically it was an episode of like 100 dicks, I think we called it. And so it was like you wanted to show that stuff in people's face. And I think that you get all that freedom, and then you're like, oh, I don't think we need all of this. And so it's interesting how when you're able to, like, you used to have to fight for like a nipple to be shown on like FX. And then you want that one nipple in there. And, now we're able to have all the penises and, vulvas that we want to show, and we don't show them. And so it's interesting how, like, when you can't do it, you want to, like, show the one nipple. And then when you're given, like, full entree, you tend to, like, okay, people don't need to see that much, So that's, like, one great freedom with Netflix. And I think the freedom, too, of not having to write to a commercial break. That's a freedom. We used to structure our acts literally as, like, okay, now we're going to go to commercial break, and then we open in a new act. And sometimes some of our acts, because they're long, we had to, like, think about where the cut would be to be able to pick up for the next mini act or whatever, for the second part of the act. And so that's freeing as a writer. And I think you're able to probably do just, I think it's interesting how it becomes more cinematic in a way. You can take more time and pause because you're not working toward those commercials. And because it's seamlessly being seen, that I know for me, like, I can open up more in an abstract image of something and take my time, versus when we're on network where you're constrained to that 46 minutes, whereas with Netflix, you could do 1 hour and 20 if you wanted to for an episode, which I think finales and premieres tend to be longer in that way. Yeah.
What do you want the takeaway to be? I mean, I absolutely fell in love with everything about this series.
I think, for me, it always has been the question of what if. I tended to be in my own head as a writer in the room, and as, the Black voice in the room, in conversation. Specifically thought a lot about Viola Davis's acceptance speech at the Emmys when she made history as the first, Black actress to get the lead in drama award. And she said the thing that separates Black women from all other women is opportunity. It's not talent. It's not drive. It's not grit and focus and craft. It is the opportunity. And I think what was important to me was to see these little what ifs, these little bitty paths of luck, in a certain sense, for our main characters, specifically for Camille and for Archie, to see them be given the opportunity to show what they can do. And in that sense, those people, the white gatekeepers, being, brave enough to make the bold choice. I hope that it affirms more white gatekeepers who will watch a Ryan Murphy show, to take those chances, and to say they're not big chances and big swings to take. They're necessary. And I think for me too, as a lover of period pieces of Gilded Age of Hollywood, I wished that Lena Horne was given more chances to be seen outside of a nightclub scene. I wish that Dorothy Dandridge was able to, really, be in all kinds of pictures as the Black Marilyn Monroe, that she didn't have the same tragedies that she did. So, like, those little what ifs, and that Hattie McDaniel was seen in her full power, and how difficult it must have been for a, big bone, dark skin girl who was raised watching her mother and her sisters work in white people's households, and being told that this is what you're going to do when you grow up. To see her navigating systems and fighting, her own people, and fighting that we don't forget that history of what brought us here today, so that now we can have the Avas and the Lenas and the Ginas, and all of these Black creators telling their own stories, that we don't forget the history and the ways in which we were pushed back, and why that time period is in conversation and mirrors the time period now where we're still saying Oscar's so white. What would it look like to see a beautiful, Black girl on that stage being victorious, and seeing a stunningly beautiful, Black screenwriter on that stage being victorious? And so I hope we leave that affirmation, and that it's okay to make a bold choice for a big picture, to all the gatekeepers out there.
We love you, Janet, and we thank you for the time. We thank you for your vision, and we thank you for this opportunity to connect with you in such an intimate way. And are certainly looking forward to more work from you in the future.
Thank you all so much for your presence, for your writing, for the love and care and attentiveness that you give to our shows, and even when our characters tend to be minor, that you all blow us up and make sure that we see it. So thank you so much for your presence and your work.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day, everybody.